It's John Black, Super Chemist. I guess it's going to take me one more thingy here, one more video on the playlist called Slavery. I forget what I was saying on the last video. So you can see that. And this was the last decade, not counting Biden. The decade before that, we have Obama and Trump. They're both good on shutting down the thing. In that decade, we let in 15 million people. That's how many the first 5 decades we left in 15 million, right? The last 4 years we let in 20 million, and in the last 10 years before that we let in 15 million. Okay, and then there's 100 years in between there. 10 more decades to account for of letting people in, and where they're letting more and more in each year and each decade. Okay, and so that's why I say easily. I want you to think about this. Okay, now Biden let in 20 million people. We already said that in the last video, right? If you count up all the known gotaways and the non-known gotaways, and the actual documented illegal aliens, and the 4 million people we let in legally. You know what I mean? That's 30 million people. Okay. First of all, that's where when we abolished slavery. That's how many. 10 million was already here. Biden let in 20 plus 10 million was already here. If you look at the stats for right before Biden took over, there were already 10 million illegal aliens in the United States already. That takes it up to 30 million illegal aliens are in the United States once Biden gets out of office here at the end of the year. 30 million. That's how many people we had in the entire country the day we abolished slavery. Okay, so don't say that we don't have half the country isn't immigrants that came in after slavery. That's just crazy. With these stats and this what I'm saying, like I said, I don't know really for sure, but after hearing these stats, I have to assume that, I bet $1 million that, half the country didn't even whatever. So now you take that into a fact, right? We said if no immigrants came in after we abolished slavery, that it's still only 12.5% of the population that was descended from people who owned slaves. Now if you say that half of the country came in after we abolished slavery, so they definitely didn't have anything to do with it, right? We take that, we take 12.5% down to 10% because rich people don't procreate as much as middle class and poor people. So that would dilute the percentage over time, over 160 years, down from 12.5% down to 10%. Now, and add in the fact now you're adding in, and that's without figuring out that there's people that came into the country after slavery. Now we know half the country came in after slavery, so that makes that 10% percentage go down in half. So that means 5%. Only 5% of this country descended from people. None of them actually had slaves, first of all, but only 5% descended from people who actually did have slaves. Okay, and if you notice, I bet you $1 million. A lot of people in government. Even though there's a slight little tiny, there's only 5% of that's like nobody. Basically nobody in the United States is descended from people who had slaves, okay? Only 5%. But I bet you if you tested all the people in government, congressmen and all that, I bet you there's more than 5%. I bet there's 50% or 70% of them are descended from people who own slaves. You know what I mean? Which should tell you something, right? You know what I mean? But whatever. Okay, so you have 100 years in between those two, the 50 years at the beginning and the last 10 years, where you just more and more migrants. I mean, but the whole point of that is I wanted to reiterate so you understand that means only 5% of the people in this country are descended from people who had slaves. 95% had nothing to do with it. Nothing to do with it. Not them, not their ancestors, not nobody. 95%. And we act like it's something where we're going to get reparations and blah, 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 blah. Okay, so the reason why I'm continuing this slavery series on is because I forgot to actually bring up the Civil War. So what happened with the Civil War? We know that the North, after 28 years, well, after 7 years, they started abolishing slavery in one state. And a year later, two more states, and it was a domino effect. 28 years after the United States was created, the whole northern, the northern republics and the whole northern country abolished slavery. 28 years, that's all it took. After 100,000 years of every country having slaves and having laws, legalizing it. So the South was run by the Southern Democrats, okay? And the Southern Democrats wanted slavery because 25% of the South owned slaves, and they were super duper rich. You figure a slave was like $600, $800, $1,000, and most people that had slaves had a whole bunch of them. You know what I mean? And so and back then, you're making like what, a penny a day, $1 a week or something. Even at $1 a week, you're only making $50 a year. After a decade, you can only save up 500, and that's if you saved every single penny. It would, so they wanted to have slaves, but how did they? Everyone thinks that 50% of the population wanted slaves. No, 25% of the South wanted slaves. The other 75% didn't want slaves. They were poor, and even if they did. Even if they were agreed and they were like, well, I think slavery's right. Do you really think these poor people in farms, they went out to die? Because more people died in the Civil War than they did than Americans died in World War II. You know what I mean? Like this is our biggest. Civil War was like our biggest war, man. The biggest, even bigger than the World War II to us, man. That's how much we died and fought for freeing slaves, man. It was like bigger than World War II, man. And do you think they really, even if they agreed with slavery, well, I don't really care, or I think slavery is okay. Do you think they could never afford one? Do you think they would go fight in a war and die for it and send their kids off to die in a war for slaves that they would never, ever, ever have? Is that what you would do? Even if you were a racist piece of garbage, would you send your little boy, your 16, 18-year-old boy off to die to fight for slavery when you know that he will never have a slave ever in his life, and you will never have a slave. You'll always be poor. You wouldn't do that. That wouldn't happen. That's not stupid. So how did they get them to fight the Civil War? What they did was they did two things in two different states, and they made it about states' rights. The states was doing something, and the federal government was saying, no, you can't do it, and we're going to stop you. And, and so when the rich people in the South, they didn't go to the poor people and say, hey, we're going to do a war because we want to fight so we can keep our slaves. No, they went around to the poor people and they said, look at what the federal government's doing in these two different states, and they want to keep doing it to other states. They want to take all your rights away, all your states' rights, and they think that they can push you around. And because you remember, a state and a country is the same thing. So so the federal government is kind of like a globalist type of government, or it's a federal government. So these states, when you say states, what rights? They're basically saying your country's rights. Like my country of Ohio, they want the right to abolish slavery, and my country in Texas, I'm in the South, so I want slavery. You know what I mean? I have a right to have it, and the federal government can't tell me what to do. You know what I mean? But in these two states, right before the Civil War started, right, they did these two things or whatever. So I don't know what they did. I can't remember, and I'm not looking it up. So that it wasn't, because the slavery thing was about states' rights too, right? But they couldn't get the poor people on board with it. You know what I mean? You can't get the people on board for that because they didn't have those slaves, and they were against slavery. But they could stage some things, and they staged something in two different states, in southern states, and the federal government came in and told them, no, you can't do that. And they ran around and told all the poor people, the federal government's telling us what to do, and we're going to have a civil war. They're going to take all your rights away. And that's why, those people in the South didn't want to fight for slavery. They were fighting for, or they thought they were fighting for states' rights. not states' rights to keep slaves. And what's funny is I've seen this one documentary, back in the day. It's a black and white documentary. It was old documentary about this one white man. He's 100 years old now during the documentary. He fought in the Civil War on the Confederate side, and he was telling how he didn't even know that we were fighting for slavery. You know what I mean? We thought we were, and he brought up basically what I was saying. They did this and that in these two states, and we thought we were fighting for our states' rights. You know what I mean? And the federal government was taking, being fascist and that. And then later on, later in my life, I find out that, it wasn't even about that. It was all about slavery, you know what I mean? And, he's saying how we were against my family. We were on a farm. We were poor. We were dead set against slavery. We were Christian, whatever, and we would never, fight for a war for slavery. We would have been on the other side if we would have known, you know what I mean? And so anyways, what else is there? Oh, and it was the Dems. It was the Southern Democrats who wanted the slavery. The Republicans were the ones who were abolishing slavery. Okay, and it was the Civil War was against the Northern Republicans and the Southern Democrats. They've always wanted slavery, and they always will. And they brought that bringing back slavery right now. Okay, with these open borders. Okay, for 100,000, not 10 or 10,000, 100,000 illegal alien kids have gone missing. They came into the country, they were documented, and now they're just missing. Okay, they came in with no parents, no adult supervision, so they went into the government's custody, and they were documented and in their custody, and 100,000 children are now missing. No one knows where they are. No one has a clue. Okay? And where do you think those kids are going? They're all, come on, man. 100,000. I could see 10 kids missing. You might say, oh, well, maybe something happened and they have a good life, and they got... No, 100,000 kids? No. That isn't... what's happening. They're going to be slaves. They're going to be sex slaves and regular slaves and, whatever kind of slaves that you can think of, the horriblest kind you can think. Okay? They brought that back. They know what they're doing. Just like the adults. They want to give them the right to vote so that they can vote Democrats. If they know if they vote Republican, they're getting deported. So they're all going to vote Democrat. 30 million of them. Yeah, I want you to think of that. 330 million people that's how many citizens are in the United States. 10% of that is 33 million. 33 million is 10% of our population. 33 million. And there are 30 million illegal aliens in the country right now. 10% of the population right now of just illegal aliens. Not immigrants that came here or visit. No, I'm talking about illegal aliens. There's already 10% of the country right now is illegal aliens. So what's going to happen to the... I guarantee you 1 million of these illegal aliens are already living in some rich, elite motherfucker's home, doing their laundry, doing their whatever, and I bet you they're probably paying them $10 a week, and they're giving them their food. You can have free food. I give you this little tiny room that has a little tiny bed and a little dresser, and you can have free living space, this little tiny space, and we'll give you $10 a week, and that way you won't starve and freeze outside, you know what I mean? I guarantee you they already brought back indentured servitude, which is basically what I'm just naming right now. They can leave, they're not slaves, but where are they going to go? They're not allowed to work. They're not, you know what I mean? If the government doesn't give them money, they're kind of screwed. They need a place to live, especially when it's cold. They're forced to be indentured servants. I guarantee you, everyone in New York that's rich, like making, $500,000 a year, they all got indentured servants now. Free illegal aliens, that they give them free food, give them free a place to live, little tiny room, and maybe $10 a week. They're basically slaves.